Chapter 4, Decree E-49, D-139. 41. All non-military cloning of sentience is prohibited, and military cloning is to be confined to Republic-licensed facilities, such as those of the government of Commando, and any others designated by the Republic now or at any time during the duration of the hostilities. This prohibition encompasses the supply of cloning equipment, the hiring or contracting of cloning technologists and genetic engineers for the purpose of carrying out cloning techniques, and the procurement of sentient cloned organisms. Exemptions: Calm, Lure, Columns, and Arcania may continue therapeutic medical cloning with appropriate license on a case-by-case basis. Proceedings of the Senate, Republic Legal Review. Kaftakar, The Road to Ayat, 473 days after Geonosis. So what's your strategy? Darman asked the lizard, trying to build relationships. How are you going to take over? Sergeant Cal said that you had to work with the locals and use their social structures to get the job done, not try to get them to work the Republic's way. Otten ambled along beside Darman and the Marit, hands in his pockets, no telltale signs of his lightweight body armor under the workman's clothes Aiden had given him. It was raining and the path through the trees was muddy and puddled, but at least they had an excuse to cover their heads with hoods. Otten had a visor and 2 days' growth of dark beard. On a cursory glance, few would spot that they were identical. "We crush Ayat," the lizard said. Her name was Sebs, and she had a frill of scarlet skin under her chin, apparently a sign that she was dominant and wouldn't take any backtalk from lesser lizards. She smelled of crushed leaves and carried a formidable Sorosu blaster slung across her chest. "We concentrate our efforts on the capital, and when that falls, the regional governments can't hold out, and we take the next tier of cities, and then the next smaller ones and so on. We have numbers on our side." "I think our Chancellor could do with listening to you," Otten said, more to himself than to her. "He likes to start everywhere at once so nobody feels left out of the war." "That's how we build, by cascade process," said Sebs. "We can also unbuild the same way." Her tail swished from side to side to keep her balance as she walked. The whoosh, whoosh, whoosh and the current of air were noticeable. "Can you sneak up on people?" Darman asked. Sebs stopped swinging her tail and her gait became slightly more lateral, but she was now moving silently. "Yes." "So you built the cities here?" "Yes." "The hired help." "But you don't get a say in government." "We didn't get paid as much as humans. We can't live in the nice homes we built. If having a say means changing that, then yes, we want a say in government. Your other comrade in the skirt was very vexed about that before he disappeared." "The first ARC? Yes, I can see how that would get Alpha 30 annoyed." "You understand. You don't have any rights either. If you ask me, it's crazy to train an army and not keep it happy. It'll turn on you in the end." Otten coughed discreetly. "You speak very good, Basic. Always pays to speak the customer's language." She came to a sudden halt, motionless. Darman's instinct was to crouch and draw his sidearm. Atin did the same. Seb stared down at them, baffled. "What's up?" "You stopped dead," Darman whispered, missing his helmet's sensors. "Enemy contact?" "No, but this is as far as I go. Too close to the city. Marits stand out. Heads we can cover, but the tails are a problem." She swung around and began walking back toward the camp. "Good luck." Reptilian species had that tendency to freeze and then burst into movement again, the GAR manual said. Knowing that didn't stop Darman from reacting every time. Otten watched Sebs go and turned to Darman again with a shrug. "Just an initial recce and maybe vehicle acquisition, all right?" he said. "Just assess the place. Just look around." "I swear," Darman said. He had fake ID, credits, and the Marits. Excellent plans of the city on his datapad. "Make sure nothing's changed since the last time the data was updated. See how far into the government complex we can get legitimately." The first thing that struck him about the city was that it was clearly defined. No gradual thickening of suburbs, no ribbon development, and if he hadn't been able to see the shapes of the perimeter buildings, He'd have thought it was a walled bastion. There was little traffic entering and leaving, and it was almost entirely made up of big vessels, repulsor trucks, and shuttles. The citizens of Ayat didn't venture far afield. "Siege in all but name," Aten said. "They're scared of the merits." "So how do we explain that we walked in?" Aten tapped his blaster. "We're young, tough, and crazy. I'll buy that. And from out of town. Aiden could have mentioned it. We overflew the area. We should have thought of it. It'll be easier next time once we've got a vehicle. Hire or buy." "I thought of liberating a crate, but it's a small city, and they probably take speeder theft more seriously than on 000. Dar, you actually like thieving stuff, don't you?" "It's not stolen," Darman said. "It's differently procured." He didn't own anything. No clone did, because everything the Kaminoans thought they needed had been provided for them. What he knew about property was learned from Sergeant Cal, and then the world of possession exploded on him when he was let loose in a galaxy where beings didn't just own things. They wanted lots of things, more than they could ever possibly use, and their entire existence was about acquiring more by any means they could. It was one thing to understand the theory, and another to feel it. Darman was happy to have the best kit he could get, comfortable quarters, and as much food as he could eat, but nothing else material made him want to risk his life to get it. "Do you ever wonder what happened to the 4 million creds that Sergeant Cal scammed out of the terrorists?" Aten asked. They were at the limits of the woods now. Ayat had a skirt of open land around it. They were ready for the lizards. "Do you think he handed it over to General Zay?" "No," Darman said. "I don't wonder." They finally broke cover and sauntered like a couple of ordinary, overconfident young men toward the main route into the city. The defenses mentioned in the intel reports were now visible, watchtowers with laser cannon emplacements. The Merits had no air assets apart from speeders. It was set up to repel simple infantry assault. It wasn't expecting the Grand Army of the Republic. If it was, evidence of its separatist allies was nowhere to be seen. They'd been walking in the open for a matter of minutes when a repulsor truck looped off course and drew up alongside them. The driver leaned out of the cab. Male human, middle-aged, dark, bearded. "Are you nuts?" he yelled. "You can't walk outside the city. How did you get here?" Darman fell into the role effortlessly and shrugged. "Had to dump the speeder bike kilometers back. Get in." He gestured to the rear of the truck. "I'll drop you off inside the boundary. You're not local, are you?" "No. Looking for work." The driver opened the hatches and Aten scrambled in, giving Darman a hand up. Almost as soon as they'd found somewhere to sit among the crates of foodboard, the truck lurched to a halt. A fist banged on the bulkhead. Darman leaned out of the hatch and found they were inside Ayat, at an intersection with a speeder bus station on one corner of the quadrant. "Off you go and make sure you get transport back home, wherever that is," said the driver and shook his head. "Dumbest thing I ever saw." "Thanks." Darman waved. The vehicle lifted off and disappeared across the intersection. "Atika, this is just a test run. Let's see how far we get today." Aten consulted his datapad. The good thing about the rebels was that they'd built Ayat, and so they still had the plans, drainage, and service channels as well as the surface infrastructure. Speeder bus to the city center. And pick up a city-registered airspeeder on the way out. Easier to get back in next time. It was, as Darman had decided from the bay of the core conveyor, an ordinary place where people got on with their lives. It was a small town by comparison with Coruscant, all low-rise buildings and modest houses. He could grasp the scale. It didn't overwhelm him. He watched from the viewport of the speeder bus, head resting on the transparisteel, and saw human beings like himself. And I'm fighting for a different species for lizards, against humans. Sergeant Cal says species doesn't matter to Mandalorians. Why doesn't the fact that I'm human matter to human beings on Coruscant? Darman knew of only one community where he felt at home, and that was with his brothers and the few non-clones who had thrown in their lot with them. The rest of the galaxy was alien, regardless of species. Now he finally understood the concept of ROATs. "Look sharp, Dar." Ateen nudged him in the ribs. "This is our stop." He slipped his datapad back into his pocket. So far, so good. Nothing's changed as far as the layout goes. Well, their builders haven't shown up for a while, have they? No wonder nothing's changed. According to the plans, the government building the assembly house had a public gallery. Darman and Otten stood in front of the portico, admired the colonnade with appropriate out-of-town awe, and sheltered from the rain while they read the notice next to the huge pairs of doors. "Sessions start at 1400 then, Dar." "It's 10:40. Time to kill." It wasn't time wasted. They had time to wander around the block, plant a few bead-sized surveillance holocams outside the assembly house, and assess the point of entry for politicians attending parliamentary sessions. They took up position in a tap calf opposite the building and settled in to eat themselves to a standstill while watching the comings and goings of delivery vessels and official-looking speeders. Darman sat side-on to the window. Otten faced outward to the road. "I'm never eating meat again," Otten mumbled, staring at the trickle of traffic. "Ever." "What's that in your hand, then?" "Fish patty. Fish doesn't count." "Reptile meat is a lot like fish." Otten looked down at the patty, sighed, put it back on the plate, and turned to summon a server droid. He seemed a lot happier when a pile of sweet pastries turned up. 2 hours to go. Darman tapped a few observations on exit routes into his datapad, chewing happily on a tube of pastry packed with minced roba and spices, and wondering when he might get a comlink window to contact Etain. Skirata was right. Focusing on the people you loved could keep you sane in a war or distract you, and he thought he'd found the balance point. He had something to look forward to live for, even if he had no idea what would happen to the army when they won the war. "We have to get Fee sorted out, Atika." "Get him a date, you mean? Hasn't Lasima got a friend or something? I hate seeing him like this." "Maybe Agent." Darman waited, distracted by his datapad, but Otten didn't finish. "Agent what?" Aten was staring at the traffic again, lips slightly parted. "Don't look out the window. Just turn away slowly." "Okay." Darman shifted position. He was starting to hate plainclothes ops. He longed for his helmet sensors yet again. "What is it?" Aten's lips barely moved. Darman strained to hear him over the noise in the tap calf. "I thought I was looking at my own reflection for a second until I remembered I'm in disguise, and I have scars." It took Darman a moment to work it out. Otten had seen another clone up close. He'd have recognized Fee, Niner, or Aiden, and there weren't supposed to be any other troops here except A-30 Sol. "Sure it's not a null? Only ones I haven't met are Jong and Comarc, and they're still after Grievous." "Says Cal." "Whatever. That's not one of them. He was a meter from me. He's moving away now." Darman held his position for a little longer. Otten put his food down and made for the doors, Darman following. It wasn't what they'd come to Ayat to do, but an ARC who'd gone AWOL was impossible. Jango Fett had raised and trained them personally, with an emphasis on absolute loyalty to the Republic. Sergeant Kal said that Jango was an unhinged Shabuir, but he always stuck to his contract, and that contract had included creating a loyal, totally reliable army. Darman had heard rumors to the contrary, and the Nulls were living crazy proof that a clone soldier could be as eccentric and wayward as any random human, but nothing had ever been confirmed. "See him, Atika?" A broad back in a black leather coat vanished into a crowd of pedestrians, but a moment later the ARC's ultra-short black crop bobbed up a little above the heads of the crowd. Otten touched his finger to his ear, activating the miniature comlink nestled deep inside. Sensors under his chin and on each side of the thyroid cartilage picked up the nerve impulses from his brain and converted silent subvocalization to audible speech. It took a little practice to think in words and not speak aloud, but Darman now found it was just like talking to himself. "Minor, change of plan," Otten said. "Just eyeballed our MIA." Darman picked up Niner's voice on his earpiece. "I've got your coordinates. Need backup? Let's see where he goes." Darman cut in. "Check with Jusik. See if there's something we haven't been briefed on." "Zay said MIA," Niner said, "unless this is a front for another mission." Aiden's voice interrupted with that gravelly indignance that marked him out. "If it is, then I don't know about it either." Darman didn't like the sound of that. There was need to know, and there was denying information, and not knowing where other special forces were placed struck Darman as being the latter. And the Nulls always seemed to hear about everything, whether they were intended to or not. "This would be easier on 000, Otten said. "He's an ARC. It wouldn't be easy anywhere." Sul, not missing and seemingly at ease in Ayat, swaggered down a tree-lined promenade and dipped down a flight of steps. The two commandos quickened their pace. It was one thing tailing an ARC trooper. It was another thing entirely working out what to do once you caught up with him. Rendezvous point: Mongtar Cantina and Brasserie, Bog Fee, Bogdan System, 473 days after Geonosis. "You're late," said Muriel. "We had to pick up groceries." Ordo straddled the chair and rested his folded arms on the back. "And Val had to stop off at the bank to get some creds. Next round's on him, then." Muriel lounged in the seat, legs stretched out in front of him. It was a noisy, seedy cantina of the type that Muriel seemed to enjoy. A droid and a young human male were at the table too, concentrating on their data pads. Nobody blinked at the presence of Mandalorians in a place like this, but the two strangers were in a world of their own anyway. "So old Psycho's okay now? Where is he? Where's Kalbwir?" "Securing the Shosun." Ordo didn't want to spell out submarine in front of strangers. Mando O was almost unknown among Aruatis, so it was a discreet code to use. Val and Mird are standing guard. Don't get agitated, but Bardika is planning to join us later. Ordo reserved the right to a little anxiety about General Jusik, who could swing in moments from a Jedi with ageless wisdom to a daredevil lunatic like Muriel. Why? Something major he wants to discuss that he doesn't want to commit to voice traffic. He's as crazy as you. Zay's going to catch him one day. Ordo wondered for a moment if it was news of Etain and her pregnancy, but there were ways of passing that on discreetly without the need to meet face to face. He indicated the droid with a jab of his thumb. "Thought you'd seen enough tinnies for one lifetime." "Just having a fascinating discourse about the expansion in the leisure economy with my colleagues here, who are—" "TK-0, said the droid sitting to Muriel's left. He looked like a taller, armored version of an R2 astromech. "And my esteemed mechanic and agent Gabe." "Always a pleasure," said Gabe, not looking up from his datapad. "But remember that without me, he's just fancy scrap." Ordo switched over to his helmet comlink. Life was so much easier with a Baish. The apparent silence that full load for outsiders looked like two Mandos waiting for a comrade to show, and in their uncommunicative Mandalorian way, not having much to discuss by way of art and philosophy. The unheard reality on the private comlink was something else entirely. "Okay, Marika, why move the RV point to here? And what are you playing at with the tourists?" Muriel turned his head as if he was staring at the bar and ignoring his brother. "The Tinny and his sidekick specialize in stolen industrial data and kit. High-tech bounty hunters. They were asked to source. I love that word, don't you? Source, like procure. So flexible. Anyway, they were asked to find someone who'd supply untraceable laboratory equipment to beat the cloning ban. Dry lining supplies, vats, clean room systems, plus specialist droids to fit it all, paid in cash credits and no records. Kosai? I reckon. Where? Doruma, tropical pleasure palace of the Mid-Rim. Ordo consulted his planetary database as it scrolled down his HUD. Water, everywhere. Oceans, almost all of which are pretty well unexplored, and likely to stay that way for some time because of the lovable marine life that was revived from The ice sheet when they terraformed the place. Tropical vacations, no other industry. But that's where the illegal lab stuff was heading. She's setting up a new research center. Who's funding it? Don't know yet. Okay, let's work through it. Battle of Commando separatist forces spring her. She's already stripped her critical data off the Tapaka mainframe, some of which I could reconstruct from the copy I took the other week, so she was expecting to leave. Seps then take her to Nemoidia. She stiffs them, does a runner, and ends up on Vinai. Muriel folded his arms and looked the other way, doing a good mime of exasperated boredom. From Vinai, she loops back into Seps space, last place they'd expect her to run, and heads for the Kalaran system, specifically Dorama. Evidence? My Tinny chum got the stuff delivered to the freight port here. Tinny, being fond of a little insurance just in case the client skips without paying, checks out the flight plan, and with a couple of transfers en route, it all ends up on Dorama. So why is he telling you? He was sourcing items for me. Extra firepower and go-faster stripes for the submersible. You've got a dozen or more lowlifes you could ask for hardware. Muriel was smiling. Ordo could hear it in his voice. Not ones that also show up doing business with Arcania. Ordo had to admire Muriel's ability to sift data. The risk-taking genes had expressed themselves even more in him than the rest of them, but he had a surprising patient tenacity once he'd latched on to the scent. He could give Mirror a run for its money. So we need to beat a location out of someone. Once I find the pilot who delivered the consignments, nobody's talking. I don't care how tight-lipped folks are, somebody always talks sooner or later. One detail, one word, something always slips. Sooner or later was the problem, as always. Time was the enemy on every level. Kosai wouldn't have just the separatists hunting her. The Kaminoans had to know she'd skipped with their data, because if Muriel could see it was missing, they'd have worked that out a year ago. But they wouldn't dare tell their main customer, the Republic, that they were in trouble. They'd want to get her back quietly and without fuss. They'd have engaged bounty hunters, too, if they had any sense. Their economy depended on it. And the Arcanians, Camino's closest rival, knew she was missing. Everyone who mattered did. Gossip in the industry was hard to control. Cloning had gone underground to beat the ban, and there were plenty of companies that'd want the top Iowa bait on their staff, so the Nulls might be elbowing a dozen pursuers out of the way to get to her if they didn't stay ahead of the pack. She's on the run from at least 3 interested parties, then, Ordo said. This is getting crazy. Do you think Lamasu is using the excuse about the end of the current cloning contract to cover the fact that he's lost her data, and now it's crunch time? How critical is it to production? I don't care, Muriel said, as long as I get my hands on her skinny gray neck, and she hands over whatever it takes to give you and me and all our Vode a full lifespan. TK0 nudged Muriel. Are we boring you? You're very quiet. We're meditating, Muriel said. We're very spiritual people, we Mando Odd, communing with the Manda. I can feel that from here, said Gabe. When do we get paid? Muriel slapped 2 50,000 credit chips on the table. You can keep the change if you find me the freighter pilot who delivered the kit to Doroma. The Arcanians might pay us more, but not as much as the Kaminoans. Is that who you're working for? Look, said Muriel. Ordo braced. His brother had that edge in his voice that usually preceded skating on very thin ice for the sheer thrill of it. He was always the one who liked rapid roping from the highest point in Tapoka City, and he had broken bones to show for it. Only the Kaminoans can clone legally. Everyone else is a Shakar who threatens their business interests. Get it? Not really. Muriel managed a little puff of exasperation. Ordo got ready to shut him up with deafening, high-pitched feedback on his helmet audio. Okay, we're Republic agents, Muriel said wearily, stamping out illegal cloning wherever we find it. Because Mando, they'd care about law and order. I'm going to slap the Osik out of you one day, Marie Kadonatu. This to me. TK0 bristled, which was no mean feat for a droid. This is hardly the time to get snotty and organicist, is it? I was only asking. If you have a deal with Camino, fine. I think it's time you tightened his nuts, Ordo said to Gaib, seeing as you're his mechanic. Find me the pilot who did the last leg of the journey, TK, my little Beskarad, and I'll pay them as well. Muriel took one of the credit chips from the table and flipped it between his gloved fingers like a conjuring trick before making it vanish up his sleeve. No penalties. Not the pilot's fault. Got it? That's the Republic's problem, not ours. Okay. Can do. And I want it by the time I finish the modifications to our ship. Oh, hang on, said Gabe. 48 hours. Muriel stood the remaining 50,000 credit piece on one end and flicked it over with his forefinger. Gabe grabbed it with impressive speed. Back here. Pilot's name and location. Don't listen to him. We'll do it, Gabe said, checking the chip with the counterfeit scanner and batting away TKO's extended manipulator arm. Trust us. I do. Muriel patted TK-0's Durasteel casing with slow emphasis, making him sound like a gong. I'm very trusting. Ordo switched back to internal comlinks. Quit while you're ahead, Niervad. The two tech hunters got up to leave. All Ordo could think of was that time was wasting, and more interested parties seemed to have a reason for hunting down Kosai every day. But who is she working for? Who is bankrolling her? If the Tipoca hatcheries found they couldn't replace the critical tech, and the Republic hadn't paid the next installment, there were several contractors waiting to fill that gap. Wow, TK-0 said, spinning his cranial section 180 degrees to train his photoreceptors on the doors. More of you? Did someone just open a new box of Mandalorians? Ordo looked up just as Muriel did. Skirata was walking across the cantina with someone dressed in his father Munin's armor. Yeah, it's Bardika, said Muriel. I couldn't stop him from coming. Jedi General Barden Jusik hadn't just shown understanding and compassion to his Special Forces troops. He'd gone native. He wore the Mandalorian armor that Skirata had loaned him to masquerade as his nephew during an elaborate sting operation with a Jabimi terror cell. Ordo knew it was smarter than swaggering into the cantina in his full Jedi rig, but it was no secret now that Jusik liked it. Vode, Jusik said, taking off his helmet. He extended his arm and Muriel clasped it in that hand-to-elbow grip that was a common Manila greeting. Jusik's untidy blonde hair still needed cutting, but at least he'd trimmed his beard. We really have to talk. Ayat, Kaftakar, 473 days after Geonosis. The rain had stopped and the sun had come out, which was a problem. Darman and Aten could no longer rely on their hoods for disguise as they tailed ARC trooper A30, Sul through the city. The ARC was walking briskly, heading north. Twice he paused to buy food from a street stall and slipped the wrapped packages inside his coat. Then he walked into the huge transparasteel foyer of the Onirail terminal, forcing them to follow. How far are we going to take this? Darman whispered. I thought we'd just follow him and see where he goes. Remember Sergeant Cal giving Sev and Fee an earful for doing an unplanned tail on a suspect and nearly screwing the whole operation? Skirata's light years away. Darman wondered why he'd ever thought Aten was the quiet, thoughtful one. That won't stop him. He hasn't just got eyes in his backside, he's got hyperspace transceivers. Okay, what's the alternative? Spot a VOD who's MIA, say, well, who'd have thought it, and carry on chatting? Darman wasn't sure where prudent improvisation ended and winging it began. Special operations were a blend of tediously boring planning and moments of what he could only think of as insanity on the brink of death. But Aten was right. MIA was MIA, and Sol was neither M nor IA right then, and he had intel that they needed. The terminal had a high-domed roof that reminded Darman of Tipoca City. Sol grabbed a ticket token with the casual, unconscious ease of someone who did this journey frequently, then sat down on a bench at a distance from the ticket barriers, staring at the ever-changing timetable board as he unwrapped one of the small packages he'd bought on his walk and began eating the contents. It looked like fritters of some kind. Darman and Auden wandered around the small storefronts on the terminal concourse after they grabbed their tickets, window shopping as far as other travelers were concerned. "He's got 5 Unirail lines to choose from," said Auden. "You think he spotted us?" "Either he's better at surveillance than we are, and he has, or he delays committing himself to a direction out of habit." It was the kind of thing an ARC would have been trained to do, to move around without drawing attention to himself or giving a pursuer any notice of a last-minute change of direction. Darman began speculating about what Sol had been doing in the last couple of months. Fearfeck, the man looked as if he lived here. The very phrase made Darman uneasy in a way he found hard to pin down, until he realized it was a bewildered envy of a world that had more options than he knew how to handle. So is this all part of the deep cover? That even the rebels can't find him and don't know what he's doing, so they can't compromise him if they're caught? Or if they're traitors? This is crazy. Zay would know. Zay would oversee his tasking. Dar, I think there's loads of things Zay's never told. Maybe Sol gets his instructions directly from Palpatine. How can anyone run a war that way? Aten didn't answer. The war was messy, dirty, and chaotic, they'd learned. But this was the first time Darman had faced the possibility that brother soldiers might be doing things that cut across his own mission. The 2 commandos killed a little more time standing at a store window, speculating on why anyone might want a vivid purple business case, watching Sol reflected in the transparasteel window. Then there was a faint clacking sound as the departures board changed, and the ARC made a move for a departure point. "What are you carrying?" Barman asked, following Sol's path. "Vibroblade, blaster, and Garrett wire." Aten boarded the rail car and sat down several rows behind Sol. "Maybe I should have brought the E-Web." "RCs aren't invincible. Anyway, what makes you think he's going to get violent? If we've crashed into a covert op of his, he'll use us for target practice." Barman recalled Muriel saying he'd never really trusted ARCs, because they'd been ready to kill clone kids during the Battle of Commando, rather than let them fall into Sepp hands. Removing 2 commandos who got in his way wouldn't make Sol miss a beat then. The rail car was half full, and Ayat wasn't Coruscant. The population was a tiny fraction of Galactic City. This was no anonymous sea of strangers who didn't take any notice of blue skin, tusks, or any of the other distinguishing features of a vast range of resident species bustling everywhere. The people here noticed, all right. Barman and Aten got the occasional glance because he assumed there were small details that marked them out as not local. Or maybe some thought they'd just passed another man who looked exactly like Darman. Sol, sitting with his back to them, took out a holozine. Darman read all the ads on the Unirail cab's walls and made a note of a couple of speeder rental agencies and a used speeder emporium. Outside the railcar, Ayat streaked past. Well-maintained apartment buildings, vessels landing at the spaceport, rolling hills in the distance. Darman followed the Unirail route on his datapad and tried to think of the city as a target he was setting up for an assault. He couldn't think of another mission he'd been on where that prospect disturbed him. This was somewhere he might live, but the Merits who'd take over weren't like him at all. He'd never considered if he had a side to be on beyond his brothers. All that stuff about the Republic and freedom was just words that he hadn't started to fully understand until recently. The last thing he thought about under fire was the Republic. It was always the brother right next to him, and the hope that both of them would still be alive tomorrow. The railcar slowed as it approached another pickup point, and Sul appeared to still be reading. But as soon as it came to a halt, he jumped to his feet and shot out the nearest exit. Aten and Barman scrambled to reach the doors before the railcar moved off again. "Yeah, he does this for a living, all right," Aten said. "Talking of which, how does he eat?" "I'll stop speculating and just ask him." "Yeah, maybe he'll make us a cup of caf and tell us about Ayat's places of interest." Sul's exit point brought them out in a less well-heeled neighborhood than the city center, but it was still clean and orderly. It wasn't the lower levels by a long shot. They full-load the ARC to a low-rise apartment building fronted by a neat lawn, where he climbed the external stairs, walked along an access balcony, and went into a second-story apartment. Darman and Aten walked past slowly, feigning conversation, and circled the block to check for rear exits. This was where they were at their most vulnerable. There was nowhere to hide to stake out the apartment, and this wasn't a commercial center where they could hang around with nobody asking why. Darman reached into his tunic and pulled out a sensor. Then he opened the link to Niner. "Got our coordinates, Sarge. Transmitting now." Niner responded instantly. Darman could imagine him waiting, pacing up and down and giving Fee a hard time while he fretted. "Copy that, Dar." "Apartment 7. What are you planning?" Darman glanced at Aten. "We'll walk up to the door. We'll run a sweep to see if he's got company. If we like the odds, we'll knock. If we don't, we walk away, set a spy cam opposite the building, and return to rethink and monitor. Is that okay, Sarge?" "I'd say that's not what we came to do, Dar, but an ARC on the loose without explanation could throw the whole mission, so we might as well clear it up." Darman had a nagging thought. He had to get it off his chest. "Ask Aiden why he didn't stroll into Ayed and check it out." The Null had only been in theater a few days. Even if he'd done a recce, there was nothing to say that he'd have seen Sol at all. Darman regretted the question immediately, and hoped Aiden hadn't heard. "Will do," said Niner. "Leave your comlink open, okay?" Darman and Aten ambled across the road and made their way to the apartment. Darman held the sensor as inconspicuously as he could, clasping his hands in front of him as if waiting for Sol to answer the door, and swept it slowly side to side. He kept his voice at subauditory level, letting the sensors on his throat transmit on the comlink. "I'm only picking up one body in there, Atika. Shame you're not a Jedi." "Yeah. Maybe they should have created Force-sensitive clones and then we could have ditched half the kit." "Okay. Knock-knock time." Darman stood to one side of the doors, hand discreetly on his blaster, and Aten pressed the bell. Silence. They waited. The sensor showed someone moving to one side of the door, but there was no noise. Sol was a careful man. An ARC trooper couldn't be anything else. Then the doors parted. Sol obviously didn't have a security holocam installed. For a split second he stood side-on to the entrance, his face all wide-eyed shock. Then his arm came up and Darman spun away instinctively as a blaster bolt shaved his cheek. Aten cannon passed him with a sickening thwack of bone. Sul fell back with Aten on top of him, and Darman hit the door controls. For the next few moments they grappled, trying to get Sol onto his stomach to pin his arms, but the ARC lived up to his reputation, bringing his knee up hard in Aten's groin and landing a fist in Darman's face. Eventually they got him face down, and Darman tried the old restraining trick of hooking 2 fingers into Sol's nostrils and jerking back hard. It must have hurt him plenty, but not half as much as he hurt Darman when the Commando loosened his grip and Sol sank his teeth hard into his hand. Demoralizing, painful, and causes serious infection. That was what Skirata said about human bites. Darman roared with pain and brought his fist down on the back of the ARC's head. Aten pounced again and got him in a headlock with his knee in his back. "Right," Aten panted. He had the tip of his vibroblade pressed into the hollow at the base of Sol's skull. "Unless you want this right through your spinal cord, Ni Arvad, pack it in and listen." "Do it then," Sol said. "I'd rather die. They sent you to kill me, didn't they? Go on. Finish me off if you've got the guts." Darman, blood welling from his bite marks, got a plastoid tie around Sol's wrists and knelt back to nurse his throbbing hand. "Bacta. Clean the wound." What was he going on about? "They sent you to kill me." "We're definitely going to have to get a speeder to move him, Dar. Rent one or something," Aten said. "You okay?" "Yeah." Niner's voice cut in on the comlink. "Sit rep, Omega." "What do you mean, Sol?" Darman asked. "What do you mean they sent us? Who's they? Who are you?" "RC-1136, Darman, Omega Squad. We thought you were MIA. You are Alpha 30, right?" "Get nodded," Sol said. "Just get it over with." Aten tied the ARC's ankles with plastoid tape and got to his feet. "Well, I think you need a chat with a colleague of ours. Darmon held out his datapad. Speeder rental, Atika. I made a note. You get the transport, I stay here. Okay. You can keep Captain Charisma quiet for a while. Omega. Niner sounded at the limit of his patience. What the shab happened? Alpha 30 thinks we're going to kill him, Sarge. We're bringing him back to base until we get this sorted. Moron. Sol sounded as defiant as ever. You've got no idea, have you? What? You're dead men. He didn't say it like a threat. Sol said it like Skirata did. That was what Skirata used to call them back in training. His dead men. It was all part of his unconvincing veneer of abuse, because the whole company knew Sergeant Cal would give them his last drop of blood, but the words now made Darman shudder. We all are, sooner or later, he said. It was sooner for clones than most.